Welcome to High Stakes, episode 33. I'm your host, Neil Orfield. You can find me on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. High Stakes is produced by Mike Lawrence. You can find him on Twitter at Awesemo. And our guest today is a bit of a Renaissance man. He's a poker player, a former political science professor, a DFS grinder, cash games, small field GPPs, and a content creator and a father. Alex Sonty is here with us. He is Alex Sonty on Twitter, DBeat Alex on DraftKings, and Alex Sonty 83 on FanDuel. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Neil.
Thank you for coming on. I've been starting these interviews just recently on Mike's idea, asking about your favorite sports team and or athletes. I see you've got that Chicago White Sox hat on. I know you live in Chicago, so I'm guessing that you are a Chicago sports fan, but tell me a little bit about your fandom for any particular athletes or teams.
So I started with baseball. Baseball was my first love. My father is Puerto Rican, and if you're Puerto Rican and in America, you're a big baseball fan. So he was a big Cubs fan, but the White Sox were a lot more exciting. Also, my father took me to more Sox games when I was a kid because it was more family friendly. Wrigley Field is not a very family friendly place to go. So when I was about 5 or 6, we went to Comiskey, and then the new Comiskey came up. So I became a Sox fan for that reason. And then I kind of like both baseball teams for a while. Football, and then Bulls. I mean, obviously, I grew up with Jordan, huge Bulls fan. The Blackhawks were excellent in the early 90s with Roenick and Chelios and Larmer and Steve Smith and Eddie Belfour, so I was really into them too. Football was a little different. So Bears games are they're always on at noon. And I could never watch them because my family went to church every Sunday, and then we had like luncheons after church. But I'd watch the afternoon football games, and I got really into the 49ers because this is just when the torch was handed over to Steve Young when I got into football. So I was about 11 when I got into football. And I loved Steve Young. Steve Young is one of the most dynamic players of any sport that I can really remember. I mean, it could have been just because I was 11 or 12, but I see the highlights today, and I'm like, holy God, this fucker was all over the place. I mean, the guy he was every bit of playmaker as Brett Favre without the mistakes.
Yeah, so I remember Steve Young a bit, but I should probably go back and watch some highlights because I don't really remember Steve Young. So do you remain a 49ers fan to this day?
Yeah, I share it. We had this conversation a while ago, I think before we started on the Contrary show. I'm also a Packers fan because my wife is from Green Bay.
Oh, yeah.
And so we kind of she took on the Bulls and I took on the Packers. That was kind of our trade.
That seems like a fair trade. Okay.
Yeah, it was a fair trade.
And you also you grew up in Chicago. You also still live near Chicago, right?
I'm still in Chicago proper. I've been in Chicago proper my entire life. So
wow,
I'm not one of these people who's from the suburbs saying they're from Chicago.
You're from Chicago. Okay. That's so I take it you don't like when people say they're from Chicago and they're from the suburbs.
I don't dislike it, but I'm like, not really,
I hear that. It's like me. I'm from the Twin Cities, and I live in St. Paul now. I lived in Minneapolis prior to this, but I grew up in the suburbs. I still said if I'm not in Minnesota, I'm going to tell people I'm from the Twin Cities because they don't know anything about Burnsville, Minnesota. They don't know what that means. so it's kind of a short form. We talked about before the show. You're going to be swiveling in your chair a little bit. You have this in common with producer Mike. Producer Mike fell up a couple stairs a few weeks back. He's got a sprained shoulder. You sprained your knee on some ice. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling a lot better. I had a grade 2 tear, so it was like a slight tear in the actual MCL. Ooh. And now my last MRI came back good. It's just very tender and I get stiff. So I'm constantly doing this. I'm at my desk because I'm kicking my leg around.
Yeah, for audio listeners, he's just swiveling in his chair a little bit. I hadn't even noticed before you mentioned it, so not too pronounced or anything. Well, let's jump in and talk about your background a little bit. So standard questions that I ask every guest: what kind of background do you have in statistics, if any? Do you have any formal or informal training in statistics?
I have very limited training in statistics. I mean, when I was a kid, I was really into baseball cards. And that got me into sports encyclopedias, right? Like the Sporting News had them for every year for about 5 or 6 years, where like for each sport, you could get all the stats for each team and where the rosters were and past records. And I got really into that. So that was like my basic kind of intro to statistics. I didn't get into advanced statistics until I read Baseball Between the Numbers. That was I was still in law school. So that had to have been like 2009 or 2010 when I started getting into some advanced stats for baseball. And then my PhD program, I took a research class, research and political science, and that was like an all statistics class of how to like the theory and practice of using data.
Okay. Yep.
Like,
Yep.
and I'd read the signal and the noise too. So I didn't really have a statistics background, but taking that class with what I had already learned from signal and noise, I kind of learned how to not use garbage data, for lack of better words. And
Which
then, I mean, it's not really a software data thing, but in undergrad, we had to take an Excel class. It was like required that we take this quantitative reasoning class that was all Excel and how to use Excel. So
okay.
I got really into that class. Again, I wasn't really a math guy. I've always been more of a humanities guy, but I really got into that class because it was like a fun puzzle.
And you use it all the time. I mean, these are all skills. So like no really advanced formal training in statistics or computer programming, but it sounds like you have. I mean, still you've done a good amount of reading about the subjects and you've taken some courses. So you're not like a complete novice either.
I'm not. I'm just, again, It's interesting because yeah, I'm so much more of a humanities guy when you look through my history and academia and whatnot. Um, I've got a big ass house that's paid for by stats.
Nice. Yeah.
Using
Right.
numbers and Excel and how to look at projections and projected ownership and solve a puzzle with them.
Right.
It's kind of
Um,
ironic.
so you say that it's paid for by stats. So let's talk about your professional background a little bit. Do you, I mean, do you do DFS full time? So I guess we'll start with, do you have any like full-time job right now outside of DFS poker or is that your primary source of income? And what else have you done since you graduated college?
I mean, I can go through everything since I've graduated college. Currently, DFS and poker are my primary incomes. I teach one class. Um, I teach one political science class currently that doesn't pay me shit, but it's it's deferred my student loans, and I'm trying to work up the credits to get them forgiven. Because I mean, I don't have much in student loans for the education, especially for the education that I had, but I just don't want to pay that shit. Like, if I don't have to, I put in so many years of public service. I mean,
Yeah.
full time and part time. This is my 13th year of public service, and I just feel like I shouldn't have to pay for that shit because I've put in so much service to the community.
Wait. So tell me about that. Your public service.
Well, just teaching,
Oh, okay. Okay.
teaching at the university level for shit money, teaching, in city colleges for shit money. Um, I chose not to be a lawyer because I wanted to have a more fulfilling career in education. I really enjoyed the research. I really enjoy the students. I really enjoy teaching. I really enjoy learning. And I felt that as a lawyer, especially, graduating law school back in 2010, we are still at the tail end of a crash in that 2008, where it was
Yep.
very hard to get a job in a firm if you were, 25, 26, 28 years old. It was very hard because the only people who were getting hired were the people who were the 45, 50-year olds with 20 years experience who were laid off a couple years beforehand.
Right.
Um, so
Yeah. I
that was
think
how I got into teaching.
you and I can see on your Twitter that we are the same age. Or did you just turn 40?
I just turned 40
You're a
in
little bit
January.
older than I am. I'm turning 40 this summer. So I'm aware we were about the same age, pretty similar
Yeah.
backgrounds in some ways. But so you must have graduated college in 2005, I would guess.
2006, I was on a 5-year plan.
Okay. All
Um,
right.
I started
Same.
playing poker. I was in a theater conservatory to
Wow.
start my
Okay.
college career. And then about halfway through my second year, um, the Iraq invasion happened. And I got very active in politics out of nowhere. And I decided, fuck this. I don't want to, write plays. I want to go and save the world. So
Yeah.
I
Right.
switched to political science.
Nice. Okay. So you graduate the poli sci degree in 2006,
2006.
and
Yes.
then within like a year or two, it sounds like you must have been in law school.
I was in law school right away. I
Okay.
went straight to pre-law and went straight to law school right away.
Nice. Okay. And then so you graduated law school 2009,
10.
2010.
I was on a 4-year plan on that one.
Oh, right. Because you have a dual degree with law school.
Yeah, yeah. I did a master's as well, and I was playing poker So that which just took up a lot of time, especially late night hours. So it was very hard for me to. I did the first year full time, and I broke down within 3 weeks. I called my uncle. I remember one morning at like 6 a.m. I had been reading all night long for a torts class. And I was crying. I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I don't want to do it anymore. And he told me, you just have to make a schedule. And if you make a schedule for your work time, your study time, your, reserve 1 or 2 hours a week to go out with friends or something, like, you can't do much. Um, and what's funny is I wear a lot of hats these days. That's some of the best advice that anyone ever gave me. No one taught me how to manage time. People taught me how to manage money. People taught me how to manage, relationships, but no one told me how to manage time at all until then.
Until law school.
Until law school, until yeah, my uncle gave me some good advice.
Yeah.
Like literally taking a calendar out. This is before we had our calendars on our phones, but literally like blocking it out, like the day by day calendars, like those ledgers. And I would block out
Interesting.
everything for weeks. Sometimes for
Wow.
like 2-3 weeks at a time.
You were a serious student. I mean, I was relatively, like, during 1L year of law school in particular, like relative to the rest of my life, I was a very serious student, but I was never on that level of like really planning everything out ahead of time, which probably bit me in the ass. I didn't was not particularly successful in 1L year of law school, so
One
probably I
L is
needed to be a little bit more scheduled.
one L is fucking tough.
It is.
One
It
L
is
is
tough.
very, very tough. You're taking, four, and then it's like hundreds of pages on a nightly basis. Like you finish 400 pages of something else, there's 200 pages of something else you're behind on.
Yeah. Like I was
Really rough.
I'm a very, very slow reader. So for me, it was like I was reading, I was working a lot, but like still never finished the homework because it was just too much stuff. I couldn't read as
Yeah,
much as they wanted us to. So yeah, I do not regret not being a part of the law anymore. I take it you don't really use your legal degree outside of, I mean, yeah, as a professor, you're not really using your legal degree. Do you use it for anything else?
I don't use it for anything. I mean, I use a lot of the skills that I learned
Yeah,
at teaching because I
absolutely.
teach. I teach. It's an intro to American government. I basically turn into a Constitution class where
Okay.
we learn about the Constitution for the first half up to midterms, and then the second half of the term we study Supreme Court cases.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got through. So you graduated 2010 with that 4 year degree. What's next? What have you been doing since then? I mean, you've been a
I was
professor.
just
You've been
teaching
teaching
for a
classes.
while. Yeah, I was teaching. Um, 20. I had taken a couple of years off from playing poker, so I went broke. I think I went broke in like 2009. And I took a couple of years off from playing poker, and then I got a little bit of money in my pocket again. So I was like, oh, I'll play a little bit. And I didn't do badly. I didn't do great, but I didn't do badly. And the site that I was playing on, I don't even want to mention the name because I don't want to give them publicity.
So
Um,
they're still around.
I don't know, but
Okay.
the CEO at the time ran off with a bunch of money,
Okay.
and it was to the point where it got to where people were paying 10 cents on the dollar on 2+2 marketplace for the funds. And I was able to sell mine for like I think I had like $5,000, and I sold it for like $1,100. Like
Wow.
it was just impossible to get the money off the site. So I left a really bad taste in my mouth. But I was doing that for a little while, and for a short time, I was like, maybe I can do this professionally again. Um, Coincidentally, around that time, I saw the ad for FanDuel in 2013 starting to pop up, and I got curious about that. And again, that wasn't really professional. It was just goofing around, and we'll probably talk about that later.
Yeah.
But professionally, I was really into teaching. I wanted to work my way up and maybe become a department head someday. But like I was like, I will do cheap work to build a resume. I was just one of those, it's funny. That's just how I am. It's how I got through law school. It's how I um, deal with DFS and how I've always dealt with poker. I will grind out the small, tough stuff to build up slowly, and I will not be defeated along the way. You know,
Yeah.
that's just how I am.
You're just a grinder.
I am. Yeah.
You got that grind set, as they say.
I've never heard
Uh,
that term. I like it. Grind set.
so then, all right. So you've been playing poker, you've been teaching, and you've been playing DFS, and that's been primarily how you've been making your income for the past like 10 years.
Probably, yeah. I mean, I think I started back with the DFS started really making me money in 2015. Poker, I stopped again. I started again in 2020. But DFS, cash, and teaching, that was my income for probably 5 years.
Wow. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess you sort of answered this a little bit, but so you started getting involved in DFS in 2013 or so. And what drew you into DFS?
I was not very good at seasonal fantasy, but I enjoyed playing it because it's like fun to do with your friends and stuff like that. But I would always just do really badly at it, and I always thought something that I was really good at was following the news.
Mhm.
Um, and through following the news, I noticed I could get small edges along the way. I just suck at drafting. I don't know how to draft any of these fucking leagues, man. I don't know. These like
It's
full
tough.
season. It's really tough. I just
Yeah.
don't know how to draft. So I was like, if I could just like follow the news and kind of plug in cheap pieces here and there and then use my stars elsewhere, like I feel like I could be a really good fantasy player. And there was nothing out there, for about 10 years. I would just constantly lose at fantasy leagues. And I saw that I came along. I was like, I feel like this is what I've been waiting for my entire life.
It's pretty great, right?
It
I think
is. It's
it took me a
extraordinary.
bit to really buy into DFS. Like at first, because I really enjoyed season long. I was very serious about it, and I was somewhat successful at it, I would say. But I was like, why do I want to play this game? That just seems so much more stressful. Like there's so much less skill involved at the time, is what I thought. And over time, of course, I got sucked in just like the rest, and learned over time that actually there's a lot of skill involved, even if there is also a lot of luck. So were you a winning DFS player right away?
No, 2013, I did a little baseball and I didn't understand it. And I just kept playing though, because it was fun to, like grind out some tournaments on the weekends or whatever. But I just didn't understand. That was something where like seasonal made a lot more sense to me with baseball. Um,
Okay.
so I couldn't really wrap my head around it. Then football started and I did all right. I discovered the head to heads about, that was more than 2014, but 2013, I didn't make any money. Um, then 2014, I started doing baseball again, and I started using Excel because I had the background of like loving statistics and always wanting to know like how to project a guy's future. I didn't really know how to do it, but I just figured I could take data that we already had and try to project with it. And did I think what I was doing was genius? Absolutely not. But I knew it was better than nothing. And that
Yeah.
was that was probably kind of my big light bulb that, if I remove myself from the equation starts to make a lot more sense. Um,
So you were creating your own projections.
I was creating my own projections, yes.
Okay. Well, that comes up to a next set of questions that I'm going to ask you. But first, just tell me a little bit about your DFS background, just in terms of like which sport or sports do you play? Which sport or sports do you think you have the biggest edge in DFS?
So baseball became one that made a lot more sense to me, especially when Derek Carty had the bat. Um, because I could just plug in. I mean, number one, it's cash in every sport. I'll put in at least $500 a night on just about any sport that I can have projections on. If I can click
Okay.
a button, if I can click a button to optimize for me, and I have the time to click, 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 I'll do all the clicking.
Okay.
Um, with tournaments, I definitely baseball makes more sense in my head these days. It took me a while for baseball to make sense on a tournament edge, but I feel like I have a big edge because I can analyze pitchers very well.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
I think I can project pitchers just as well as just as well as um, a great projection model can. I can't project hitters at all. I have no idea how to do it, so I completely lean on the bat.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, and then NBA cash is probably my best cash game, even though I don't really know the NBA very well. I covered the Bulls for a couple of years with the SB Nation, and I followed the league very closely, but I hadn't covered the league at all for about 7 years before I started playing NBA DFS cash. And I found that to be the easiest because it's literally just click a button. We had no late swap for a little while there. I could just click a button and let it ride. And then as the late swap disappeared, I kept having kids, and it became more difficult to play NBA DFS.
Right. Wait. So you mean as late swap appeared, right? as late
And
swap
then it
came in, you were
reappeared. Yeah,
yeah,
because it
yeah, oh,
was there
reappeared,
for
yeah,
a while and then it disappeared and then it was back. And
right, right,
like, I can't do this.
yep. All right, yeah, I want to talk more about cash a little bit. Actually, let's just talk about cash a little bit right now. So let's talk NBA first. You said that you, when you were playing NBA, it was basically just clicking a button. Were you just playing the optimal?
Pretty much. I think sometimes I would switch it up for, and this is something I do for baseball too. Um, I'll switch up my lineup for three mans and five mans. If two lineups are about the same and they're differentiated by one or two players, but the second lineup has more upside, I'll put that in three and five mans.
Yep.
And then I'll put the optimal in my head to heads. And I don't play 50-50s. I find they're kind of dumb. I don't know. Maybe I just haven't wrapped my head around the genius of 50-50s. I think it's just kind of dumb to not like spread your investment across like 100 different people. Then
Right.
play like all or nothing into one contest. And then the double ups, I hate the rake. The rake is just way too much. I don't understand that.
Wait, so you don't play 50-50s, meaning, so I think of a 50-50 as being like it can be 100 people in a contest, 50 people make back a little bit less than what they paid in, 50 people don't make back any money. That's the
Mm-hmm.
50-50. A head to head is just you versus one other player. It's the same
Yes.
concept, except you're playing against just one other person. So you
Yeah.
don't play head to heads because you don't like the variance of playing one other player. Do
I
you
I prefer the head to heads
oh, you
because
prefer head to heads?
I can play 100 contests against 100 different people
I see.
instead of the 50-50s where you're just scattering it, or putting
Okay.
$100 into to try to defeat 49 people. It's. I do it when I need the volume. If I'm just not getting the head-to-head volume, I'll play the 50-50s because at least it's a good rake. The double ups, on the other hand, like the rake is astronomical compared
Yeah.
to it. It's like an extra percent, or like what, an extra 1.5% or something like that. It's
I haven't checked in a while because I don't play, but so
I
like so
haven't seen
for
what it is in a while, but
people who are not familiar, so double ups, it would be the same kind of concept. 100 people in the contest, and then like 43 people. So less than half of people will double their money. And then
yeah,
that's where the rate comes in. I don't know if it's 43. Would it be 40? I don't.
I think it's 45. Is
Okay,
it
45.
45? Yeah, I don't know either because I don't really even play them anymore. But when I
Okay.
saw, I mean, Roto Grinders, we have this little extension where it tells you the rake and the rake on a contest, and it comes out to like 12 something percent sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes it's as high as like 12.8%.
Right.
Um,
And it's hard to beat that kind of edge, especially in a cash game where like your goal is to play as close to like the lineups that most people are playing as you can in general. I guess that
exactly. I
yeah,
feel like it's difficulty. It's taking on difficulty for difficulty's sake.
yeah, yeah, exactly. All right. So then for MLB, how do you set your how do you like choose? Actually, no. Let me take a step back. What percentage of your lineups are in like how do you split up the different contest types like cash like 50-50 slash double up type contest versus three mans and five mans versus larger. I mean, do you play any very large field GPPs?
I will if I'm playing. Um, I mean, I play at least $500 a night. So
Okay.
let's say I'm playing $1,000. I'm probably plunking $500 into head to heads, maybe $100 or $200 into three mans and five mans, and then the rest of that for the most part in 100-man contests. And
Okay.
then I will plunk in like whatever, like into the $55 slam on FanDuel. Like as a small percentage of what I'm playing in the night, I'll plunk that single lineup in there. Um, so
Okay.
that's how I play this. I mean, if you want to play, say I play the big contest, yes, I do show up, but I'm not engineering my lineups directly for those contests. I'm just kind of plugging them in there just in case.
Okay. Yeah. Same thing that I do. Like if I make a lineup, a cash game lineup, which I haven't done in years, but if I were to, I would still probably enter it into a GPP. Just like, what if this is the nuts? I might as well have it somewhere else where I can make some serious money. Okay. So you play primarily more than half of your bankroll is being played in cash games.
Very much so, yeah.
Okay. So let's start with you don't play double ups, you just play head to heads. Let's start with how you create your head to head lineup. So let's talk about MLB because you're still playing, I
Mm-hmm.
assume you're still going to be playing MLB seriously. Are you using like the optimal from from the batter, from wherever you get your projection? Are you just playing the optimal, or is more going into it than that? Like, is it? I mean, you say that you are great at projecting pitchers. I imagine that plays a role. How do you go about determining what kind of lineup you want to make for an MLB head to head?
I will check the optimals, um, and then I will make a decision whether or not to lock in the pitcher from my model or to use what the optimizer says. It's usually, I mean, Neil, if we're talking about 30 days in a month, I differentiate from the optimal pitcher on FanDuel 3 or 4 times in a month.
Okay.
So we're not talking much. On DraftKings, I get there's a lot more swings because there's so many different ways to build your lineup depending on which shitty SP2 you use.
Yep.
Right? Like there's so many different lineups between using the $8,400 guy, the $7,300 guy, and the 5K crapper.
Yep.
So from there, I'm looking at the lineups and I'm looking at the variance within the lineups, and usually I'm trying to go for the lower variance lineups, as like the RotoGrinders optimizer looks at standard deviation and shows you the standard deviation of a player.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll try to go for. Does it? Okay.
Yeah,
which is great because I think for making baseball lineups, sometimes you just have to go to the path of least resistance.
Right. Okay. So is who everybody else is playing, is that a big factor for you? Like, if you think a player is going to be 60% owned in your cash games, are you trying, and I guess you're playing head to heads, but if you think that your opponent is more likely to play someone in a cash game setting, are you more likely to then play that player?
I'll do it in football.
Okay.
Because football, there's so many, it's easier to win a 3v3 than to win whatever it is, the 8v8 or
Sure.
It's just easier to win those 3v3s. So in football, I think it has to happen a lot.
Okay.
Where I will lock in a really strong, maybe the second most optimal player, but he's got immense ownership. Like I might lock that guy in and then optimize around him.
Yep, that makes sense. And then also another thing, in GPP settings, we're always trying to stack teams in GPPs. Like, typically we'll on DraftKings play a primary 5-man stack, on FanDuel obviously primary 4-man stack. Are you concerned at all with stacking in your cash games?
Never. If anything, when the optimizer spits out like a 4-man stack, this happens on DraftKings a lot. I feel like with Coors Field being underpriced, I will go out of my way to like lower it to 2 or 3 man per team because it's just there's too much crazy shit can happen.
Yeah.
And the difference between that 4-man stack that's underpriced in Coors and whatever comes out next, it's like 0.7%. It's like 0.7 of a point,
Right.
And I'll take the principle over the math in those situations.
Okay. Yep. That makes sense. Anything else you want to say about cash games?
I think, a lot of the cash game work isn't building lineups. A lot of it is really clicking. It's, finding the right games, finding the right opponents, knowing your rake, calculating how much you're allocating toward cash versus your tournaments. Bankroll management and game selection, those are skills. And I don't think we talk about that enough. I think it's actually borderline irresponsible for us creating content to not talk more about bankroll management and game selection, because great lineups are going to make you money over the long run, but if you don't have bankroll management and game selection, you're not going to be around in the long run.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. So it's something that I don't really talk about much because it's not really one of my strengths, to be honest, because I just play the largest field GPPs all the time. So like, and I guess that's part of my bankroll management, is learning what I'm best at, which are the largest field GPPs, and just focusing on those. So in that way, I guess it's something that I do factor in a little bit. But you're interesting because you play so many different types of games, because you figured out what you're good at, which are these cash games. But it's also like you play head to heads, but then you also play 3-mans and 5-mans, and you're deciding what to play based on the rake and stuff like that. So you probably are a good person to talk about bankroll management and contest selection as a concept. Let's talk a little bit more about how do you decide how much you want to play in terms of like 3-mans and 5-mans on a given night versus cash games versus, I guess, head to heads or GPPs?
Well, for a long time, I was playing 90% cash and 10% tournaments and not really thinking about the tournaments. I was just like, 90% of what I would play for that day, I play maybe 2 or 3% of my total bankroll in a day, or for a slate. Let's just say for a slate.
Yep.
Of
If,
that,
for the
of
sake
what
of the
I've
definition, can you just tell me when you refer to cash games, what do you consider like a 3-man and a 5-man? Are those cash games to you, or what do you
Yeah, I would
consider them?
consider those cash
Okay,
games.
cool.
I'd say once you get over 20 mans and even 20 mans, you can get into more tournament strategy
Okay,
where
yep,
you're at least going 4x, if not going 4-3-1,
yep.
uh, that's when you start getting into the more tournament mindset of building
Okay,
lineups.
got it.
So yeah, so when I'm talking about cash, I used to do 90-10 where I'd do 10% tournaments, just kind of a flyer, like, until I didn't start taking tournaments seriously until around 2019 or 2020. And now because I've incorporated a lot of 100-man contests, which are a lot less variance, I do 3-1. So I 3-1 cash to the 100 mans in tournaments. I find the 100 mans to be like, they're just gold. They're total
Really,
gold. Yeah.
I've never
And
played them.
on FanDuel, they pay really well. They pay like 25x for first.
Okay,
So if you play, $200 worth of these 5 and 10, $25 100 mans, you can come out with, or even I think third is 10x. So I mean, you could finish second and third and come out with, thousands of dollars in a night. And you could easily do that 3 or 4 times in a month.
wow. Okay,
Um,
what
so
percentage of entrants get paid out in 100-man?
12,
Oh, really? Just the top 12 get paid
it's
out
the
at all?
top 12. Yeah.
Interesting.
I want to say DK pays out 15 or 18, and it ends up being only like 13 or 14x for first. It's just not really worth the time to grind those out.
Right.
They probably could be profitable, but you have to look through the lobbies of, the 25 and make sure not too many sharks. You've got to, really monitor that. I think at 25 and $10 level. But the $5, you can just play them all. It's literally
Right.
play them all. Um,
Competition's just not as great there.
it's pretty weak, yeah. And the $1 and $2 for anyone who's listening, if you can play the $1 and $2 on FanDuel, like play them all.
Yeah.
If you're playing the $55 slam every night, you can put $50 into those $1 and $2 contests, and what is maybe a min cash in the $55, you could 5 or 10x in the 100 mans.
Yeah.
It's a great bankroll builder.
Speaking of contest selection, I mean, those have to be like if you are able to play the anything under $3 on FanDuel or whatever the limits are on FanDuel and DraftKings. If you can play the low dollar stuff, that's definitely where you're going to find the weakest competition. Would you agree with that? Like it's just the
Totally
beginner
agree.
contest. Yeah.
Totally
And
agree.
those I think on FanDuel, like they actually label them on FanDuel. This is no experienced players, or I don't even know what they label it as, but they label maybe they do on DraftKings. So I think I just don't even see those contests at this point. But yeah, if you can still play the low dollar stuff, it makes all the sense in the world. I kind of think I did play this for a while. I was gonna say I missed out on that, but no, when I started, I mean the biggest contests on FanDuel were $1 and $2 when I started for
Yeah.
NBA DFS. So I don't know. Now they're up to like $4 or $5 typically, sometimes up to like 15. So people don't have it quite as good starting now as we did 10 years ago when the contests were huge and just like $1 or $2 to buy in.
You can still do it. And, there are a couple guys who have come up and, because I think when you create content, like people don't really know what they're doing. They're sports bet. A lot of them come from sports betting.
Yep.
It's like, hey, I've got blah 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 on FanDuel. I made some money, but I want to play some DFS. What should I play? I get that question from sports bettors a lot, and I'll tell them go straight to the 100 mans. Don't waste your beginner time. Play the beginner contest and play the 100 mans. Don't waste those early contests on like a head to head or a $4 100K that you have no chance in.
Right.
you know, Spend it on like something where you can get back, 10, 20, 25 times your money.
Are the swings pretty great in those 100 mans because only the top 12 payout? I imagine you can go a week without winning any money back. You're entering this
Oh
every
yeah.
day.
I mean, I can go 3, 4 weeks.
Yeah.
But I
That,
mean the great months, I end up, probably top threeing everything 6 or 8 nights in a
okay.
month. I mean, those are the great months.
And that makes up for the rest because
More than
you're
makes up for it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Huh. Yeah, I've never even looked at the 100 mans. It's kind of intriguing to me now that we're talking about it. But I mean, that sounds so swingy. Yeah, you don't get back any of your money so often when 88% of people aren't cashing those contests. So a little bit tough there, but I mean, you talk about bankroll management. If you have the bankroll for it, then you can obviously get through it just fine. And they're typically not. It sounds like the buy-in isn't especially high on those. You're talking about $5 to $25 in
Mm.
general.
The $25, toward the end of the baseball season, I hope this isn't permanent. They really dried up.
Really?
It was, every single day it was me, Sig Eric, B Writer, and someone I can't remember right now, but it was four of us every day. We'd enter at like noon, around noon or whatever, and no one would fill the fucking thing up.
Do you think they
So
were checking who was in it already?
I don't know. Maybe people just went broke and just couldn't afford the $25 anymore. But
Yeah.
as the
So
season
we're
goes on, people lose money. So
Were you getting some overlay then?
no, they don't go unless they fill up. They're not GPPs.
Oh, gotcha. Okay,
Yeah.
that's rough.
And
Interesting.
yeah, I don't know if that was the case, I wouldn't play because I'm not going to play a 3-man
Right.
for any money against those guys.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
Yeah, it's tough competition there.
yeah.
Um, I had another question about that. The 100 mans. I forget what it was. I'll come back to it. All right, let's talk just a little bit about process. Do you do any simulations or use simulations from outside sources as part of your process?
I don't use simulations. I mean, I use models like the bat,
Yep.
but I'm not actually like running 10,000 simulations on my own or anything.
Right. Which that's another one of my questions is going to be: do you create your own projections from scratch?
Just for MLB pitching.
Okay.
MLB pitching, I attempted to do something with NBA last year um, to incorporate projected ownership into weighing their points projection based on their projected ownership.
Yep.
I failed miserably. I lost like what did I lose last NBA? I lost like $15,000 last NBA season. It was so stupid.
I mean,
So it's just like I'm just not going to play it anymore.
I think a lot of people do those kinds of models where they're factoring in projected ownership into their projections. It's not something that I have ever attempted to do. That's above my head right now. I haven't figured out how to do that, but I think that there are a lot of pros who do it that way. So could just be a small sample size too, like losing fifteen thousand
Could have
dollars.
been.
Like that's very possibly just small sample size. Maybe it would have worked long term, but you obviously don't have to do that to be successful. So why keep pushing it if you know that you can have success without doing that? What about so ownership projections? Are you doing your own ownership projections or also taking those
I
from an outside source?
aggregate.
Okay.
I aggregate projected ownership. That's something I attempted to do in baseball at first when I was doing everything at first because I figured out pretty early that ownership was important in baseball because of splash plays. Like,
Right.
especially, I mean, ownership is important in all sports. I'm not going to say it's not important in any sport,
Right.
but when you're talking about football and the splash plays of football and baseball, um, you want the low owned splash play.
Yeah.
It's a simple axiom of DFS. Like you want the low owned splash plays.
Yep.
So I tried to do it with baseball and it didn't work very well. But I worked on a rating system. Um, I rated people's ownerships based on projections and how they were projected in different places.
Okay.
Um, and it was fairly accurate. It was directionally accurate, but it wasn't the pinpoint accuracy that you get with the sites that we have now.
Right. So this is a case where it's just maybe makes more sense to just pay for the sites and they'll give you
Exactly.
the ownership rather than
Yeah.
trying to do it yourself. Yeah. And that's a conversation that you had when you were on the theory of DFS with Blender. The what is it worth your time to do? What is it not worth your
Yes.
time to do? And we've got so many tools available now that a lot of us, and you and myself included, we don't really need to make these tools because we've got great tools available to us and we can better spend our time elsewhere than trying to do our own projections. But you do have experience. I think you mentioned it on this show already. You did do your own projections at one point, like your
I
actual
did.
point
Yes.
projections.
And what I wasn't actually doing point projections for baseball. I was doing kind of a rating system
Okay.
where I was projecting WOBA for for situations based. I was adjusting it for ballpark and pitcher splits, and it wasn't great, but again, it was better than me just eyeballing shit on my own.
Right. Okay. Interesting. But you've gone away from that. So it sounds like ownership plays a big role for you in creating your lineups.
Ownership is everything with creating my tournament lineups. Yeah, I kind of have an advantage where I didn't seriously play tournaments until like mid 2019. Cash games kind of dry up a little after the All-Star break in baseball. So I was like, well, let me just play some tournaments and see what happens. Um, and I noticed very early in my cash game career that when when I was sharing ownership with people and they were making big plays, I wasn't getting anything for them, you know. But it was safe, you know. It's the right play. I made the right play. Play the best plays in cash.
Right.
So it was pretty easy to apply the logic of the inverse to tournaments. You know that I want the lower owned splash plays. Um, that's I mean in baseball and football, which are my two major sports, you want the low owned splash plays.
Yep. For GPPs. Yeah,
For
it's a
GPPs, yes.
funny distinction there because it just flips completely playing cash games versus GPPs. Cash games, you
Yeah.
break the tie toward whoever is going to get the most ownership in your contest or in a head-to-head, whoever your opponent is most likely to have. Whereas in GPPs, it's like the exact opposite. Like if these players project similarly, but one of them is going to be way higher owned, you want the other player because, as you say, you want those low owned splash plays that'll cut through the field a little bit quicker than if it's
Yeah.
somebody that 40% of the field has, then you're only cutting through a smaller chunk of the field. Let me take a minute away from this conversation with Alex Sonty to tell you about our sponsor, NBA Bet Pro. Stokastic's top ranked DFS pros have made millions of dollars in daily fantasy contests using Stokastic's NBA DFS player projections. Now, users can have direct access to the same NBA player stat projections that drive our winning DFS player point projection models. With this data, users can apply advanced sports analytics to player prop bets and get an edge on the sports books. These NBA projections are directly managed by Stokastic's team of established experts, including Alex Baker, Steve Buzzard, and Sean Zahn. For a limited time, you can get a 7-day free trial of BetPro for you new users, then $15.95 per week or $55.95 per month. Use the link in the description of this video to take advantage of this great offer. Would you call yourself an exploitative player?
No, not at all. I would like to I would like to learn how to exploit opponents a little bit more. Um, but my theory on gambling is just it's a bias that's just like stuck in my head of if I break even, other people's mistakes will be my profit.
Right.
If I have a break even strategy and I'm playing well, it doesn't have to be if I'm playing, you know, in an optimal, semi-optimal manner. Like I'm not just going out to like be the smartest guy in the room, but if I'm just making quote like sound decisions, then the mistakes of everyone else will funnel over to me.
Yeah, and this is
So
the I've been told that the terminology is wrong here, but this is a conversation we had earlier a lot in past pods. Uh, it's basically like you're trying to play game theory optimal, essentially, which I'm told that's not the right terminology, but essentially you're trying to let other people make mistakes. You're just trying to play your steady, across the board, play the best lineup, and you let other people make the mistakes, which makes sense to me. That sounded sort of how Nerdy Tenor, who I know you're familiar with Daniel, he
yeah,
plays what he describes as a game theory optimal, and of course again, I don't know. I'm not going to quibble about the terminology there, but he plays in essentially just trying to play the best plays and let everybody else make mistakes. So you're kind of trying to do the same thing.
I am. I mean, of course, ownership matters, and that's an exploitative strategy of exploiting where people are not playing a play very much. But we're all looking at the same fucking numbers. We're all looking
Right.
at the same projected ownership and the same points projections.
Yep.
If the whole field wants, if 40% of a field wants to go to player A and 20% wants to go to player B and 5% wants to go to player C, the optimal move is to go to player C when all things are equal.
Right.
That's the best play. I think we think of play the best plays as play the highest projected ownership or play the highest point projection.
Right. Right.
But we do have to combine the two. We have to combine the two columns and come up with a decision from there. And I
Right.
mean, I'm saying that as a microcosm for our lineups in general. I mean, of course, our lineups need to have a high amount of for GPPs. There's going to be a high amount of variance baked into a successful lineup
Yep.
because we're choosing to absorb that variance. This isn't variance. It's just like, oh well, it's just gonna happen. You're gonna lose here and there. Like, no, like it's okay to lose. Like,
Right.
I think we take on a mindset of it's okay to lose tonight. It's
Yep.
okay to lose this week. It's okay to lose for the next 3 or 4 weeks.
Right. Look at the
Um,
long term.
Look at the long term.
Trying to make the best decisions that long term it's going to pay out the most.
And those,
Which
yeah, those best decisions can be a low owned play, it can be a high owned play.
right.
Um, it's just, do our lineups have a proper amount of variance and ceiling in them?
Yep. Going back to the 100 mans, I remember what my question was. I assume it's just a single entry. I just wanted to double check the 100 man contest.
You can play three, but
Okay.
I think it's kind of stupid to play three. I don't understand. 3 entries in a 100-man contest where you win 25x to first. The math doesn't work out in my head how it's EV to play three lineups. It just strikes me as plus EV to just plunk your one in there. Otherwise, you're putting $3 in to win 25. Like,
Right. But I guess it depends on the difference in how good the lineup is for your best
different.
versus your, like, if you have three that are all equally good and all have, a better than 1 in 100 chance to win, or whatever would need to be to actually make it plus EV. Like, I would think you could make 3 plus EV lineups to, I mean,
Totally.
you theoretically you should be tripling how often you win too if you're playing 3 lineups a night versus one, right?
You should. I guess there are two ways to do that. One way is to make three lineups that are very similar. One is to make three lineups that are very different. Um, Another way, I guess there's a third way to do this. You could do three lineups where you choose to stack three different teams and mix those three teams up.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that might be a winning strategy because you could have, uh, two top five teams in a night, two top five lineups in a night. So I think that's probably a way to do it. But the way most people do it is they have very similar lineups that have like 2v2s, or they just switch out one stack,
Okay.
and then two bomb and one does all right. Or
Interesting.
they have, three completely different lineups. One does all right, or one does really well, and the other two bomb. Like, you really can't have, you know, it's just more sensitive to getting to like having your lineups bomb.
Right.
Whereas if you're really plunking in, the one lineup, it's, oh well, whatever.
Right.
Figure it out tomorrow.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I haven't thought about it how much, like and I've heard other people say the same thing, and I'm always curious about, like, man, I have no idea how to calculate the math of like the EV of entering three versus one. I'm like, in my
Hey,
head it makes
if someone plays three and you've got an argument for it, I'd love to hear it because it doesn't make sense to me. But
right.
I can be convinced. I'm an open guy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't know, like in my, like, I'm thinking is like you could, as long as the three all project well enough and they're not like 1v1s, like it seems like it could be plus EV, but or like the EV wouldn't change with one versus three as long as they're all equally good lineups. But yeah, this is math that maybe is a little bit above my head. So maybe somebody will respond and let us know, if they think it's a good idea or not. But that's definitely an interesting thing to think about, that how many is the optimal to enter when you can enter three in those. I also want to ask you a little bit about, so we talk a little bit about how you set your cash game lineup or your head-to-head lineup. How do your head-to-head lineups differ from your 3 mans and 5 mans, and do you ever enter the same lineup in both?
I frequently enter the same lineup.
Okay.
The difference, I brought this up on Blender's. This was before Jesse Winker had a power surge, but Jesse Winker was like a good kind of 310 hitter with a high on base and no power.
Yep.
And then he was usually priced around the same as Joey Gallo, who was a big strikeout, big home run hitter. If the two optimals were a 1v1, Jesse Winker and Joey Gallo, I'd probably plunk the Jesse Winker lineup in my head-to-heads, and I'd probably put the Joey Gallo in my 3 mans and 5 mans. It's a microcosm for the bigger picture. I'm not saying that exact scenario exists. I'm saying, like, the way I think about 3 mans and 5 mans, I will take on a little bit more risk for higher ceiling with one or two players in my lineup, not for the
Okay.
whole lineup. Once you get up to maybe 10 man, but definitely with 20 mans and 100 mans, you take on the higher ceiling and the higher variance and the lower ownership. You do all those things and you shove it into your lineup.
Yep.
Um,
But in the cash game, so in the cash game, you're just playing the lower variant. So
Generally
I would,
playing the optimal.
playing the optimal, and then you make slight tweaks for, like, so in this case Joey Gallo, he's more of a boom bust type play, so you're more likely to
Yeah.
play the boom bust type plays in a 5-man versus a cash game. But otherwise, it's like almost the same lineup with like a 1v1 or 2v2 with players who are more boom bust in the
When I
5-man.
switch it up, and that's maybe once a week.
Okay, but frequently it is just the exact same in
Mhm.
your cash game versus your 3-man 5-man.
Yeah,
And then, so then, do you often find yourself in those 5-mans duping? Like, do you end up with the same lineup as somebody else in the competition?
that's a good question. I almost never do.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I almost never do because of, well, because there are two variables. One is switching out, swapping out once or twice a week, usually like once a week. The other is that I'm not projecting pitchers the same way everyone else is.
Right.
I'm projecting pitchers in my own way. And because of the way salaries are, like $500 does a lot to your lineup. In a
Yeah, that
baseball
changes
lineup,
things.
especially, it changes the entire lineup. So
Right.
if I'm playing Verlander while the whole field is playing Max, and because I took my model's suggestion, um, and I saved $500, or maybe I spent up on $500, and I lost $500 somewhere else. Like, the salary just doesn't fucking matter in baseball. Like,
Yeah.
you can spit out, you can take the higher price pitcher that is maybe quote suboptimal and have a lineup that is about the same,
Right.
0.2 points different.
Yep.
So when I run the optimizer after locking in that pitcher, it'll change the entire lineup.
Right. Interesting. So you're not trying to just play the exact same lineup as everybody else in cash games, which, I mean, it's never your goal, right? To play the exact same lineup. But like we talk about, like, you are trying to, in general, you're more likely to break a tie towards the player who's likelier to be owned than the one who's not in cash game settings. But the way you set lineups, because you project pitchers differently, it's just going to change the entire lineup. So you don't end up having that problem of, oh, I'm running the optimal in a 5-man, which you probably don't want to do if you're using the optimal that other people are also playing. But because you play just a little bit differently with your pitchers, you don't run into that issue so much.
I want the best projection.
Yep.
I do want the best projection. I just have a different projection on pitchers than I have a unique. I'll just say it. It's a unique projection.
Yep.
You know, is it better? Is it worse? Maybe that's a way that I'm differentiating from the field, but I'm not differentiating for the sake of differentiating. I believe in the way that I'm projecting pitchers. So
Okay.
like I'm going on that philosophy.
Yep. All right. Makes sense. Um, yeah. So you don't play NBA anymore. You're still playing NFL. Is your NFL cash game process similar to ML? How does your NFL cash game process differ from MLB?
Um, that's one where I'm most likely to, like I said, I'll look at like a top 5 or top 10 optimals, and if a guy shows up in 8 of the top 10 but doesn't show up in the number one, and he's projected very high in terms of ownership, I'll go that route. I'll go with what lineup that guy, because that guy changes up the whole lineup, right?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
sure, we're talking about lineups, not players, but when you switch a player out, when you swap a player out, it will change the entire lineup. The optimizer will just come up with something different, and you end up. So sometimes a 3v3 turns out being organic, um, just from that decision. But I mean, generally, I'm clicking a button and doing what it spits out. I mean, over an 18-week season, I'm doing what I just told you about, locking in the most owned guy. I'm doing it once or twice.
Okay.
Um,
Interesting.
I made a lot of money I made like, it was an insane amount of money when Darren Waller had the 16 catches.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? He had like 24 targets.
Yeah. It was the first week of the season, I think. Yeah. He had just, yeah. And I would think it was the first week of the season last year where he just like, and it was like, is this what's going to happen now? Is like, is this Darren Waller's role? Are they just going to target him? And then just like completely fell off after that. Yeah. I think,
I had a big sweep. It was like a 30K day
damn.
because everyone played Travis Kelsey.
Yep.
Like, everyone and their mama played Travis Kelsey. And I made a shift in my um I made a shift in my three mans, and I ended up doing the shift in my head to heads too, because of what Waller was doing so well, price points per dollar. And I was like, God, if I could just use that $2,000 somewhere else, I feel like I'm gonna make a better lineup. Like even though the optimizer told me not to,
Yep.
it's just like just logic. How are these two projected per dollar so equally? But Travis Kelsey is the more expensive one and getting shoved in our faces.
Right.
And that was just a moment in time where I made a tweak and it really worked out, and it paid for the rest of my season. You know,
Right. So you kind of went against your like your
I
typical
did.
strategy of like in cash games, I'm going to go with the higher own play. You decided that day you just felt better about the Darren Waller. It was you use your instinct a little bit. Like that was a case where it was like, all right, the optimizer's telling me to play Kelsey and everybody else is going to play Kelsey. And usually I want to do that. But in this case, I just think you just thought that Darren Waller was maybe a better play. It was going to make you make better lineups. You didn't really care that you were then differing from the field a little bit more than you
I thought it
usually
was a
do.
similar play, and that playing him would get me an extra like $3,200. What was it? I think Kelsey was $7,800, $2,100.
Okay.
It was like a $2,100 difference, which in football, like that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's big.
That's a whole lot of money. So if you were projecting the same point per dollar, like, and it's tight end, like if I can spend that money on wide receivers and running backs, like it just felt like it. Yeah, I guess it wasn't an intuitive move, but it just felt like the right play, and it worked out. You know,
Yeah, I'm just
I could have fallen flat on my face too,
right, right.
obviously,
Yeah.
but um,
But then you were winning. I mean, then you're playing triple ups, five mans, and which it sounds like. So that move, I mean, it obviously like I feel like that your logic tracks for like from what you've been saying throughout the show for the three mans and the five mans. But this was a case where so typically you were trying to you initially built with the Travis Kelsey lineup. You then
yeah.
made the tweak for the three mans and five mans the way you usually do. But this is the rare case where you were like, man, I like this lineup better, and I'm going to play it in the head to head too,
And
essentially.
I played like every three man and five man up to $100. Like I just played all of them. And
Yeah,
same
yeah,
with played all the triple ups. I didn't play many head to heads that week because I was differentiating from the field, not just with Travis Kelsey, but my whole lineup. We reallocate $2,000 and you get like 5v5s on people. Like that's just
yeah.
dangerous. That's really dangerous in cash. You're either gonna win everything or lose everything. So I didn't play as many head to heads that week. That was where my game selection came in. Um, but yeah, I played like every three man, every five man, every triple up I could. I don't even like triple ups. I played a bunch of like the 10x boosters and like which I literally never play, but I just
Yeah.
decided if I'm going to take this risk, um, I need to go all the way with it and select the right games for him.
Which does come back, as you said, to your conversation about bankroll management and contest selection, but also in this case, did you play more contests because you liked the lineup you had so much? Like in terms of bankroll management, is that something that you do where you will adjust how much money you play on a given slate based on how much you like the slate? Like how much edge you think you have on a slate?
I played about the same amount of money. I think I
Okay.
played like 3 or 4% instead of 2 or 3%.
Okay.
I don't think I nudged toward 5% of my bankroll on that.
Okay. Well, that's still, I mean,
Profits were just
you
so
did play a
huge
little bit
because
more.
the profits were so huge because of like those 10x boosters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Again, like all the quintuple upping I was doing and triple upping I was doing. Um, I mean, NFL is kind of weird. I don't adjust my bankroll rules with NFL, but I get tempted to do it probably more with NFL than anything else.
Yeah. So I got to ask you, when you're playing all these cash games and stuff, do you use Roto Tracker?
I do, yeah,
Does your graph look different from all of the like heavy GPP players you see? Like you look at mine and it's like
very different.
yeah, and it just
Yeah,
spikes at peaks and valleys, same as like actually Blender is actually an example of somebody who's a little bit flatter than most GPP players because he also plays the cash games. So are you just is yours like a straight line, just going for like
yeah. It's like
horizontal, slight vertical kind of thing?
a Parkinson's hand. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
shaky, it's shaky, it's shaky, and it goes up and up and up and up and up.
Yeah.
You know,
It's kind of
um,
nice, right? You can, I mean, that makes you feel more comfortable to do it like full time, like you do, where you are just like, this is a big part of my income. It's a lot. You don't feel as good about it when you're a GPP player and you go months without winning anything. Whereas you play in these types of contests. I mean, do you feel like you're a little bit more like mentally healthy because you are playing this type of contest as opposed to playing the peaks and valleys of a GPP?
well, I've been playing poker on and off professionally and recreationally since 2004, so I can take swings.
Okay.
Mentally, I'm pretty good at taking swings. As for playing the way that I do, it's funny. I did just mention how it's shaky and it goes up, 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 but the last halves of seasons, I get dips
Okay.
because cash games tend to dry out with fish, so it
Yep.
gets to be a lot better players, and that's when I go more. I will shift a little. I'll pivot more toward tournaments.
Yep.
Maybe like 25% of what I play that day is a tournament instead of 10% of that day. Um, and when we're talking about NBA, like I just suck at NBA GPPs. I just don't know how to play them. And then NFL, the contests are so huge. Like I could be doing everything right, and I could lose 5 years in a row
Oh
with
yeah.
NFL. Like
Yep.
it's you got 18 big slates. It's nothing. 18 times 5 is what, 90. Yeah. So
Yep.
um, 90 slates. That's 3 months of baseball.
So that comes back to, I mean, you mentioned another kind of bankroll management slash contest selection. They kind of go hand in hand in a lot of ways.
They do,
Bankroll
yeah.
management contest selection is dropping out of those head to heads as the season goes along, which I've heard elsewhere that it's just like early season NFL, you got to play cash games, which I've never taken the advice, but I've been given the advice many times. Early season NFL, you got to jam cash games because there's so many fish early season and they dry up later on in the year. And
I've told
that's,
you that. I think I told you the same thing
yeah,
with NBA. I think in our messages.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, you did tell me that. I forgot that we had that conversation in DM. But you're not the only person. Like I've heard that from multiple people. So is that one piece of advice that you would give in terms of bankroll management slash contest selection is jam cash early in the season and fade away maybe later on?
Yeah, I should have started doing that probably in 2017 ish, but I didn't start doing it until 2019. Um, Mostly because I didn't really understand the tournament, like the general game theory of tournaments.
Yep.
And a light bulb didn't go off in 2019. I just had some success. Um, but 2020 we had the COVID year, and that was weird in baseball. You just play everything, you know. So that was a case where we didn't have an all-star break. We just kind of played everything for 2 months.
Right.
And but yeah, once 2021 came around again, I almost did it where I played everything for 6 months, but I learned really fast. I had 2 horrible weeks after the all-star break, and I was like, okay, this is how we're doing it again. I'm just gonna drop out. Um,
Yep. Since you brought up, do you think we don't talk enough about bankroll management, contest selection? Do you have any additional tips that you want to give in terms of, or just advice for bankroll management and or contest selection?
I think number one is to have a strategy.
Okay.
Any strategy, and nothing stupid like I'm gonna play 20% every night, but some just have some rules. We live in a society here. Have some sort of a rule as to how much you're going to play in a night. I mean, I think 10% is way too loose and way too gambly, but I think a lot of people do it. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do 10, 15, 20%. And then they just redeposit a week or two later when they get paid. I think there's a lot of that goes on that we don't
Yep.
talk about. So I think we need to educate people on having more of like a 5% rule, right? Like, I mean, Johnny Bax was one of the best poker players in the 2000s for a while, and he came from a stockbroker. Stocks, I don't know. He came from working stocks. Like I don't really understand the market very much, but he said something like your portfolio should never have more than 5%. You should no more than 5% of a contest in your portfolio. Like just unless you're just devoted to one contest. And that stuck in my head, and I was like, that seems pretty loose to me. Like as I was playing
5%.
poker, I was like, yeah, 5% is. I mean, you lose 20 in a row, or you lose 40 out of 50, and
Right.
that just happens in
Yeah.
life. And I think we need to talk more about how often we lose, not so much how much we win. Like, look at our RotoGrinders pages and see how much we win.
Right.
We can talk about how much we lose if we really want to educate people and have people take care of themselves, because we need, even if they're bad players, if they're, well, especially if they're bad players, we need them around. But if you're an average player, like we need the volume for the ecosystem to exist.
True.
Um,
Yeah.
so we need to keep the average player. We need to keep anyone who decides to subscribe to our sites. people who are paying the bills, putting the lights on and everything. We need them to not go broke.
Yep.
I don't think we think of it that way.
Right. That like we need you to play solid bankroll to manage a bankroll well
Mm.
to stick around.
I think game selection. I mean, you talked about it great. Like there's some things you don't do that, and maybe you feel like you're missing out. But at the same time, Neil, let's see you playing the games that you're best at, and you thrive, and that's what matters.
Right.
Knowing what you're best at is, again, like we got to have some rules here. One rule is what am I best at, and then kind of the rule is play what you're best at. Even if that's just your only rule in terms of game selection, like just having that rule keeps you
Yeah.
from just trying to play everything.
Right. Although it can take some time to learn what you're best at, right? So like
Sure,
people who are new, like you get your ass handed to you in GPP. It's like, yeah, we all get our ass handed, or most of us get our ass handed to us in GPPs early. So there's a little bit, but then would you just say like play less of your bankroll while you're learning, essentially?
totally, totally. Because the number one's not going to win $100,000 out of nowhere. It's going to take some skill and some experience to get there for a lot of people, for
Yep.
most people. So that $3 that you're trying to win $100,000 with, allocate it somewhere else. Anywhere else that can make you some more money. Now, look, if you've got $100 to play in a night and you're only playing tournaments and you want to plunk in the $3 to $4 for a lotto ticket, fine. But be honest with yourself that this is a lotto ticket.
Yeah.
That it's going to be very hard to win. When honestly, it's going to be impossible to win without a single entry. Um, that another thing we should probably be doing in terms of game selection and how we talk to people in our content is we shouldn't be talking about these contests as $4 contests. We should be talking about them as $600 contests.
If you're
Because
maxing it out. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, because it's going to take 100 entries, if not 150, to really have a shot at this tournament in the long term and being profitable.
You think
Um,
that, so you think that if you're in a contest where it is a 150 max, do you think that it is a negative EV decision to not play the max in the contest, or even like a 20 max? Like if you enter a 20 max, do you think it's a negative EV decision to play 5 entries in a 20 max?
I think 5 and a 20 max is probably okay. I mean, someone else would probably have the better math on that than I do. But just like working in my head and from what I know in terms of like poker, and I'm thinking of like rebuy tournaments, right?
Right.
Like in a $10 rebuy that has 10,000 people in it, it isn't a terrible idea to just go fucking nuts in the rebuy hour, and
Yep.
like maybe you end up spending $200, but top prize is going to be like $20,000, right? That makes sense.
Yep.
But in the $20 rebuy, where you maybe only have 400 people in it doesn't make sense to spend more than 3 or 4 entries. So
Interesting.
when there's a 20 max, um, maybe five is okay. Maybe five is okay. I don't know. Someone else probably has a better math on that, but on the before that 150 max, like you got to come heavy or stay home.
Interesting. So I have always taken, and I've had this conversation many times, and I have no idea. Like the math is tough for me, because to me it's like, well, the number of entries in the contest doesn't change based on how many lineups I enter. So like sometimes I'll play 5 in a 150 max contest, and I always have, and I'm not like I've heard people say like what you're saying right now, that is negative EV, and I'm like, I feel like there's pros and cons, but it's an interesting conversation that I think people need to continue to have. Like, should I
Mm.
be like, is it just a bad idea to play? Like, obviously, there's a difference between like I'm just going to play my cash game lineup in the big GPP because even if it's negative EV, I just don't want to have that regret if it does go off. That's different than like, I'm playing 5 lineups tonight and I'm going to play them, or I'm playing, you know, $75 tonight, and I'm going to play it in the $15 as opposed to playing it in a $5 or something. Like it's an interesting conversation that I'm not totally sold on it being negative EV, but I have heard, I mean, I've heard you say it, I've heard other people say it as well, that it give the advice of not playing the 150 unless you can max it out. So
I
um,
think the size of the contest matters. Sorry to interrupt you
yeah,
and jump on you
yeah,
there.
no, go
I
ahead.
think there's a difference between a 5,000 man 20 max and a 1,000 man 20 max.
Yep,
So like the FanDuel Slam is routinely like 1,000 to 1,100 people, and I think it's a 20 max, right?
I don't play that one.
But I mean, you can put 3 or 5 in there. and be totally fine because it's only 1,000 entries in the whole contest together. When you're talking about the 20 maxes that are like the $4 or something on DK, I don't know how
It's like
many is in it.
27,000 or something people in it.
Yeah, I mean that's silly. Five is just silly because you're competing with 19,995 contests or entries.
Right.
It's very difficult.
So it's not that it's negative EV necessarily. It's just that it's going to take you so long to actually see a return that you
It
don't think
could
it's
be
worth it to play.
positive, yeah. It could be positive EV, but it can't be optimal. Yeah. Again, I don't want to just get into like narrative here, but or just use rhetoric here because I don't know the numbers, but it just doesn't
Right.
sound right.
Okay. Yeah. So I get it if the argument is don't do it because it's going to take you too long to see like most people are going to take so long to see the return that it's just not going to be good for your mental health, or for like just like if you're trying to make a living at this, it doesn't make sense to do it. But from an
Mm.
EV standpoint, I think it's like there from an EV standpoint, I think it's an open question whether it can be plus EV to play fewer than the max. But we won't end that conversation today. I think that's a conversation that
That's
has
it.
been ongoing for a long time that
We will
I find
accept
kind of interesting.
non-closure, as I tell my students.
What's that? We'll accept
We will
non-closure.
accept non-closure
Yeah, I like that.
in a
That's good.
conversation.
It's a good phrase.
Yeah.
All right, we did get a listener question from Evan. He said, "I see a few Excel optimizer products out there now. Many of these are very granular. Do you guys think this can help someone create plus EV lineups, or are we wasting our money? Thanks." So this is a question for both of us. Um, I don't have a really strong answer. I don't know what products you're referring to here. I would say I'd give the same advice that I give for like listening to content. Like listen to people who win, and if it's people that you are not really familiar with in DFS who are selling Excel optimizer products, I probably would not bother. I'm sure that there could be some that great DFS minds are putting out there, but um, do you have an answer to this question, Alex?
Well, the question is, can they?
Right.
And the answer is yes, they can. The next question that raises though is, can we find these cheaper Excel models for $100 or whatever that do better than Cardi's for 400 or Stokastics for whatever $100 a month or something like that?
Right.
Fantasy Crunch, plus Fantasy Cruncher. And I think the answer to that is no. That sometimes pricing isn't always an accurate value on a good or service, but sometimes it is.
Right.
And I think in terms of models, the pricing, there isn't just great pricing, but there's a lot of volume and people using them and people attesting to Stokastic and attesting to roto grinders and the bat. And I would just stick. I just don't want to waste the money because it's not just wasting the $100 on the Excel model to save some money. There's losing a bunch of money to figure out that it's bad.
Right. That's
How
part
much
of it.
money
It's
do you
like,
have to lose to figure out that it's just a piece of shit?
right. Yeah, it's kind of what I was thinking too. It's like we don't know for sure if they're bad. Maybe they're good, but it's going to take you some time to figure that out. And as you say,
Yeah.
you're losing money that whole time. So probably not something that I would typically recommend. But of course, I don't know the specifics of what you're talking about. And Alex and I are both biased as we both work for. I work for Stokastic. Alex does content for Rotogrinder, so we might be a little bit biased here too. But in general, I'd say it's worth it to pay for the better products rather than trying to figure out if what somebody's selling is any good. But again, don't know what they're talking about specifically.
And we're talking about products that are underpriced.
Yeah.
As they are too. The bat, roto grinders, Stochastic, like these are underpriced products, priced to sell, priced for the average person to be able to afford it and become a profitable player.
Yeah, I mean, you know that I agree with you there. I've said it before. The first thing I did when I had the money to buy a Stokastic subscription was I bought a Stokastic subscription. Literally, that it was the first time I won six figures. I bought a Stokastic subscription, and the bat I think is a similar product. Like it's projections and a lot of the same stuff. And yeah, I just think paying for the premium of like people that you trust. I think you just got to buy a product that you trust. I would not buy I wouldn't buy lineups period, but like lineups or like tools from somebody who I haven't seen have a track record of success in general, just because there's upfront money, and then as you said, the cost for entering contests and testing the product, I just don't think it's worth it.
Yeah, no, totally agree. Totally agree there.
All right, Alex, we are going to close up. And I always like to ask the question, tell me about your favorite win or win celebration.
So I forgot you were going to ask this question. August 11th or August 12th, 2020. We had just bought our house, and we bought our house in March of 2020, and then the lockdown happened. We had big rehab on the house that went till like June, so we didn't actually move in until late June. So we'd been in the house about 5 weeks, and I don't know, do you know what a derecho is?
Derecho, to the right.
Derecho is, no, it is like, it's like a mini tornado.
Okay,
Hit
no,
Chicago.
I'm not familiar. Interesting.
Tornadoes never hit Chicago because we're so close to Lake Michigan. But for some reason, this derecho hit like my house, and my basement flooded.
Ooh.
It was horrible. I just spent a bunch of money on like permaseal to like seal up our house, but it just poured in through the back door. It wasn't like a bad seal issue. We had lost power. I had 2 kids and a third on the way. It was hot as fuck because it was August.
Yep.
And we had no power, and I was just like sitting in my office late at night. We had no lights on, and I had some battery juice in my laptop. I decided to fire up and see what was going to happen the next day on DraftKings. You know, like I'll set up some contests, put in a dummy lineup, and just like let it rip.
Yep.
Mike Fiers was pitching against the Angels, and I love playing against Mike Fiers because he's a fly ball pitcher, and Angel Stadium is a good home run park.
Yep.
So I jacked up them and the Phillies against someone I didn't really remember. I did a 5-3 stack. I don't remember who the pitchers were because our power was still out. My battery died out, and the power came back at like 6:30 p.m. No, 5:30 p.m. Some people on our block were like jumping around, like the power's back on, the power's back on.
Nice.
You know, and then like we had to figure out what to do for dinner. The basement was still like damp and nasty, and I could plug in a dehumidifier. Anyway, long story short, I couldn't edit the lineup. I had too much shit going on, I put it in like, I don't know, $800 worth of contest or something. Like I was like, whatever, man, that's $800 down the drain. So I watched some baseball that night. I put on that A's Angels game, and the Angels beat the shit out of the A's.
Nice.
And I think it was like a 50K night for me because it was like 30 on DK and 20 on FanDuel.
Wow.
And it was just for like $800 that I put in that night.
That's fun.
Yeah.
And it sounded like it was needed at that time.
I needed it. I needed something good to happen because my basement was damp for a while.
And then you just go right away and reinvest some of it in like some new carpeting or something.
Yeah. Oh, but this is kind of the kicker. I told you I just started playing tournaments in 2019, just the last half of the season, just for something to do. And so it was kind of early in my quote tournament career that I had a huge day like that. So it was huge. It gave me some vindication.
Right. I can do this. I can play these tournaments.
Yeah.
That's really fun. All right, Alex. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Where can people find you?
I'm at Roto Grinders. I will be writing multiple times a week, maybe every day. We'll see how my schedule works out, but I would like to do every day. I write once or twice a week at Fangraphs, and I'm on Twitter at Alex Sonty.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks again to Alex Sonty for joining me for High Stakes episode 33. Thank you to Mike Lawrence for producing as always. Again, you can find Alex on Twitter at Alex Sonty, Mike at Alex Sonty, Mike at Awesemo. Thank you for watching. You can find episode 34 in 2 weeks on Friday afternoon on the Stokastic YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks for watching.
Thank you, man.